Hello, my name is Chris Tancredi, and this class is an introduction to semantics. In this class today, we're going to go through a little bit about what semantics is and what semantics is not, and give an overall view of how to approach the subject of semantics. For starters, there are two different ways that we study meaning that are both looking at meaning as the meaning of language. One of them is semantics, which is the content of this course, and the other, pragmatics, is something that is very often closely related to semantics, but that we want to be able to put aside. So let me start by looking at these two different kinds of meaning. Semantics is the study of grammatical meaning. It's the meaning that the words give you literally. The meaning that you end up with may not be something that you want to communicate, but those are the words that you have, and that's what they give you. Pragmatics is a study of the meanings that people communicate to others using language. Sometimes pragmatics and semantics fit perfectly. The semantic meaning of a sentence is exactly what you want to convey, exactly what you want to communicate pragmatically, and so the message that you communicate is exactly the message that's encoded in a sentence. But sometimes they come apart. So let's consider the following example. This comes from Kate Kern's textbook, Semantics. And it's considering the sentence, "I forgot the paper." So what does this mean semantically? Well, semantically, it means something like this, that there is a salient time in the past at which the speaker of the sentence forgot the uniquely salient paper. Okay? To give you an idea of what the pragmatics can do with this sentence, consider the following two situations. Situation one, Betty goes out to buy coffee and the morning newspaper. She comes back with only coffee. She says, "Oh, I forgot the paper." Okay? Perfectly fine sentence, perfectly clear meaning. Situation two, a detective investigates a murder. The victim has a scrap of wallpaper stuck to his shoe. The detective finds many other clues and comes up with a hypothesis about what happened, but then realizes that that hypothesis does not account for the scrap of wallpaper. He says, "Ah, I forgot the paper." In the first situation, "I forgot the paper" basically means I forgot to buy the newspaper. Forget is filled out, if you will, to mean forget to buy. And the paper is identified as being a particular kind of paper, the newspaper. In the second situation, again, we can fill out the meaning of forgot, but this time it's I forgot to take into consideration something when forming my hypothesis. In the paper is a scrap of wallpaper on the victim's shoe. Okay, so these meanings are not the literal meanings of the word forgot or the paper. If you look up in a dictionary, forget, you're not going to see forget to buy. You're not going to see forget to take into consideration when forming my hypothesis. You're going to see something about a lapse in memory. Likewise, with the paper, you're probably not going to see newspaper, and you definitely will not see the scrap of wallpaper on the victim's shoe if you look up paper in the dictionary. These meanings are the meanings that are conveyed, but they're not the literal meanings. Okay, so we have a gap between the literal meaning, what you would get by looking things up in a dictionary and putting those meanings together, and the meaning that we express. Okay. Now this class is a class on semantics, not on pragmatics, so we're going to focus only on the literal meanings. of expressions. And what those meanings are used to convey, that's a separate study. That would be for a course on pragmatics. We will have to consider certain things that are properly analyzed as pragmatics, but mostly in order to be able to put them to the side and focus on what we are really trying to get at in this course, which is semantics. Okay, so what does semantics do? Semantics gives us a way of connecting expressions with meanings. There are an unlimited number of expressions, but we can put them into small categories. We have words, dog, the, flew. We have phrases, the US president, in Yo-Yogi Park. We have sentences, John walked, I'm happy today, okay? Expressions are exactly what you would think they were, okay? The more difficult question is, what are the meanings that we associate with expressions? And we're going to give two different ways of looking at meaning. One is going to be a very intuitively obvious way of looking at it. And one is going to be a very weird, unobvious, non-intuitive way of looking at it. The reason we give the second one is because the second one is what's going to actually work best for creating a semantics that tells us how meanings go together. But let's look at the first one. The first one is what's called sense. The word comes from Gottlob Frege. Frege was a late 20th century, 19th. Frege was a late 19th century scholar who essentially invented the foundations for modern semantics. And he split meaning into two pieces, a sense and a denotation. The sense is what you think of when you think of meaning, kind of. It's what you know when you know the meaning of an expression. For words, this is what the dictionary is going to give you, a description of how to find what the word is talking about, if you will. So for the word dog, we might have something like a four-legged animal of the canine family. Now, individual words you can look up in a dictionary. Larger expressions you can't, but larger expressions too have senses. So the US president might have something like the unique individual who leads the administrative branch of the US government and commands the US armed forces, or something to those effects. Okay. Sentences as well have senses. Maybe we would say that John walked has a sense something like, at some time in the past, an individual named John moved by alternately transferring his weight to one leg or set of legs if he's an insect, and advancing the other leg or legs. Okay, so that notion of meaning is, in a sense, obvious. It's what you would think of when you think of as meaning. It's very hard to say exactly what a sense is, but it's something with intuitive appeal. It feels intuitively like the right kind of a thing to be a meaning. The second part of meaning, the denotation, is something that doesn't really feel meaning-like, but is connected to meaning very clearly. It's the things or situations in a world that an expression picks out or is true of. For some of these, that's kind of an obvious thing to say. Take the expression, the capital of Japan. Whatever its sense is, it's clear what it's talking about. It's talking about Tokyo, the object. You go and find the city, and that is what the expression is talking about, is what it's picking out. Tokyo, then, is the denotation of that expression. We also could, of course, have the word Tokyo, which has its own sense, but it also picks out the exact same denotation, namely Tokyo. Common personal names, like William Shakespeare, again, they pick out individuals, picks out the individual William Shakespeare. We say that the individual, the real world person, is the denotation of the name. Now, this notion of picking things out works well for names and definite descriptions like the capital of Japan, but it's kind of a strange way of thinking about a lot of other expressions. In Yoyogi Park, what does that pick out? Kind of a weird question to even ask. We don't use that expression to pick out things, but we can say that it's true of certain things. It's true of trees that are in the park. It's true of people at a particular time who are in the park. It's true of basically anything that is in Yoyogi Park. And so we extend this notion of denotation to these kinds of expressions by saying that the denotation is the objects, the people, the animals, the things, the air, everything that is in Yoyogi Park in this case. Okay. Now the last case, the case of sentences, that's a really strange one. Intuitively, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but we will see that it turns out to have a good reason for being identified the way that it is. A sentence, a declarative sentence, something that makes a statement, something like John walked, is going to have one of two values as its denotation. It'll either be the value true or the value false, depending on whether the sentence is true or false. Now, in the case of names, we might be able to get away with saying that the denotation simply is the meaning. In the case of a definite description, like the capital of Japan, that clearly doesn't seem right. There seems to be something more to the how we got to that denotation that counts as meaning. And in the case of in Yoyogi Park and in the case of John walked, what we give seems very remote from our intuitive notion of meaning. Before we go on, I'll introduce a third notion that comes up sometimes. We won't be making a lot of use of it. It's the word use, it's a notion of reference. Reference is like denotation, except the way I will use it is to pick out things that intuitively feel like they are referring. So the capital of Japan feels like it could be used to refer to a particular place, Tokyo. Tokyo, the word, feels like it's referring to a particular place, Tokyo, the place. The name William Shakespeare feels like it's picking out an individual William Shakespeare. So these expressions will say, refer to the things that they denote. In the other cases, we're not going to say that in Yoyogi Park refers. We won't say that the sentence John walks refers. We'll use the notion of denotation for those. So reference is a denotation for an expression like a name or a definite description that intuitively feels like it picks out a place. So we have this notion of sense that feels intuitive. We have this notion of denotation that doesn't feel very obviously meaning-like, but the two are connected. So a sense, whatever a sense is, has to pick out the denotation. It doesn't go the other way. Denotation does not determine sense. And we can show that with these examples here. We have three different expressions. The capital of Japan, the city in Japan with the largest area, the city in Japan with the largest population. As it turns out, these three expressions all pick out the same place, namely Tokyo. But they seem to pick it out in different ways. For one, you go and you find whatever place it is that has this one property of being the capital of Japan. For the other, you compare cities in terms of their area. How much space do they take up on the map? You find the largest one of those. And then for the third, you look at the number of people in the cities. You find a city where the number of people is larger than all other cities. Those are like three different paths that in this case take you to the same place, okay? If you think of the sense like the path, the sense brings you along that path, and where you end up, that's your denotation. These are three paths to the denotation Tokyo, three then expressions with three different senses that all end up denoting the same thing. Okay, so next we have to start looking at how we get these meanings to come out by putting together the pieces that we have. And the first pieces that we have are the words, sometimes called lexical items. We have individual words like the, cat, rat, dog, chased, okay? And we also have another piece of meaning that comes from how the words go together. Somehow we have to get the words to go together to mean more than just the list of words. When we put words together in a sentence like the dog chased the cat, we don't just take the meaning of the, put it together with the meaning of dog, add the meaning of chased, add the meaning of the, and add the meaning of cat. We'd end up with a list of 5 meanings, whatever they are. And whatever the meaning of the sentence is, the dog chased the cat, it certainly is not just a list of meanings, okay? Rather, we seem to put those meanings together in ways, and that putting together we're going to call composing, okay? And we have a principle that connects the syntactic structure, the way things are put together into a phrase and into a larger phrase and a larger phrase, with their meanings. It's called the principle of compositionality. When two expressions combine to make up a larger expression, their meanings compose to make up a more complex meaning. Now, just based on this principle of compositionality, we can start to give the beginnings of an explanation for why sentences that use the same words can convey different meanings. So the dog chased the cat, for example, is very different from the cat chased the dog. Same words, different structures, different meanings. So compositionality tells us that somehow, by putting the words together differently, we end up composing a different meaning. Now, there are a couple of ways that we can give the meanings of our basic expressions like cat. Okay, we can describe it. This is trying to describe its sense, for example, by saying a cat is a 4-legged animal of the feline family. Of course, that's only going to help if you know the words involved, in particular feline. And there are going to be limits to how far you can go with these, because when you come to describe what a feline is, it's very hard to think of a way to describe feline without using the word cat. Feline, the family of cats, including, and you list all the different kinds of cats. That's maybe a not bad definition for feline, but if we defined a cat as a feline, and then we defined a feline using the word cat, we have a circular definition. It doesn't really tell us what we're talking about. The second way of kind of giving the meaning of an expression is by pointing, or what we call ostension. You look, you point, you say that, maybe that animal is a cat, or maybe that color is blue. Okay. Uh, Now, by pointing, you don't actually give a meaning. All you do is pick out something that that meaning happens to fit, happens to be true of. I point to my pet cat. Okay. Cat doesn't mean my pet cat. It's going to include a lot of other cats as well. And my pointing doesn't tell you that. It just gives you one example. Cat applies to this object. But it does give you that, and that is the beginnings of what we need for meaning. Let me go through that in a little bit more detail. We have these two notions of sense and reference. And the question is how we get those. Pointing doesn't give you either of them. But let me go through a kind of a what if scenario. What if a child learning a language for the very first time at a very young age of maybe 1 year old sees a cat? Mother says, look, a cat. Okay. Do that enough, and the child will make a connection between the sounds, the word cat, and the object, the specific cat that the mother is pointing to, for example. Okay? At that stage, perhaps the word cat is acting like a name for the child. The child doesn't yet know whether cat is picking out only one thing or if it's going to pick out multiple things. As time goes on, the child sees other things that look very much like the first thing that was pointed to as a cat, and the mother, sure enough, says, oh, another cat. Okay, the child now has the beginnings of a need to change how the word is used. It can no longer be a name of one object. Cat can't just name the first object that he saw as a cat. It has to also be something that can include the second. Okay? So what does the child do? Well, let's say it looks for things that are similar between the first cat and the second cat. Fluffy, maybe they're both white. At this stage, he doesn't know what's going to be important, what's not going to be important, but comes up with a lot of different properties that both cats have. And then decides, instead of saying cat just directly picks out this object, he decides cat is going to pick out these properties. Not sure which yet, but some of these properties that seem to fit both cats. Okay, and it goes on in time, sees more and more cats, gets a better idea of what those properties are going to be. Those properties, whatever it is that he sees all the different cats sharing in common, those are kind of like the sense of the word cat. Then the child sees a new animal never seen before that seems to share those properties, checks it out. Another cat. Everybody seems to think that's fine. Now the child has a sense for cat that picks out new objects that are in the denotation for cat. That is, we can think of this as maybe a way of justifying having these two types of meaning for a word like cat. Okay, they start off like a name. They can't stay a name because there are too many objects that are being named. They turn into something else. They look for properties that apply to all of the things named and change the meaning. Change the meaning so that it directly picks out the properties instead. And the properties then pick out an entire denotation. Now, if you showed the child cats anywhere in the world, they would be able to say, yes, that's a cat. Child doesn't, of course, see every cat in the world, couldn't possibly, but he now has a procedure, if you will, for deciding whether something is or is not a cat. It could be wrong in certain ways or different from the way other people decide. In certain cases, there might be disagreement, but we can see now a procedure for identifying all the things that are cats. Okay, now we have a couple of things that we want to be able to explain in language. One of the things we want to explain is that there are limited tools that can be used to create new expressions. Finite means, we call them. And this comes from the fact that the brain itself is finite. Language is processed by the brain, therefore language is going to have to somehow only make use of a limited number of things to produce all of the meanings that you want to produce. We have words, actually quite a lot of them. I think your adult speaker can have somewhere in the range of 20 to 60,000 words that they have under their control. Okay, that's a large number, but it's not infinity. Okay, we have ways of putting words into structures. That's syntax would be the study that looks at exactly how that is done. Probably a very small number of ways of putting words into structures, but it can combine so many different words that it's we very soon end up with an enormous number of potential full structures. And as we'll see very soon, that's actually an unlimited number of structures. You can make larger and larger and larger and larger structures that are still part of language. And finally, we have ways of interpreting the words themselves and the structures that they become part of. This was our compositionality from before. We take two words and put them together into a structure, we compose their meanings. Okay. We also now want to account for the fact that there's no limit to how many expressions can be created or generated and understood. That is, language has what we call an infinite generative capacity. Our explanation for this is that the structures themselves are recursive. One structure can contain another structure. The structures are interpreted compositionally. If you know the meaning of one structure and the meaning of another structure, and you put those two together into a third structure, you put their meanings together into a third meaning. So recursion can be demonstrated in many different ways. In the older days of generative grammar, recursion, people focus on particular kinds of expressions. Verb phrases, VPs. We have the verb phrase left. We have the verb phrase said Mary left. The second one contains the first one. So we have a verb phrase inside of a verb phrase. If we have rules of grammar that allow us to put one verb phrase inside of another, then in principle we can do that again. You say Mary said, John said, Mary left. Sue said, Mary said, John said, Mary left. John said, Sue said, Mary said, John said, Mary left. We can keep on going on and on and on. That same example also shows recursion of sentences. If we think of Mary left as one sentence, well, that sentence is inside of a larger one. John said Mary left. We also have noun phrase recursion. We have the cat, that's a noun phrase. We have the dog that the cat chased, that's a noun phrase. The bigger one contains a smaller one, okay? Or we can just look at phrases. Anytime we put two expressions together, we end up with a larger phrase. The cat is a phrase. It's contained in a larger phrase, which is the cat chased. That's contained in a larger phrase, that the cat chased, which is contained in a larger phrase, dog that the cat chased, which is contained in a larger phrase, still, the dog that the cat chased. Now, sometimes this recursion can go on and on and on without any limit. We say it's unbounded. The dog barked at the cat that chased the rat that ate the cheese that was left on the table that was built by the man that blah, 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 blah. Right? You can picture this going on for as long as you are willing and patient enough to continue with it. Other cases of recursion seem to be bounded. We can put one thing inside of another here. The cat that the dog barked at chased the rat. The rat that the cat chased ate the cheese. Okay, but if we try to extend that, do this multiple times, as in the third example here, we end up with something that's almost impossible to understand. The rat that the cat that the dog barked at chased ate the cheese. And if you do it one more time, it becomes absolutely impossible. The cheese that the rat that the cat that the dog barked at chased ate went moldy. Okay, you can maybe guess what it means, but nobody can just listen to those things and immediately understand, or even after a fair amount of work, understand what they're supposed to be saying. Okay, I want to turn now to different types of expressions and what kinds of things they pick out. We have names. They're expressions that pick out objects or individuals, but do not describe them. The name Shinzo Abe picks out Shinzo Abe, the Prime Minister of Japan. It doesn't describe him as Prime Minister. It doesn't describe him as a husband. It does not describe him as a Japanese citizen. It simply picks him out. Names can be of people and of places, like Tokyo, we've seen before. And they can also be things like the Beatles, picks out a rock band. Okay. Now, the Beatles does not look like a name. It looks like a definite description. It's got the word the at the beginning. But it's not describing the band. It's not like the band is got 4 people, each of whom is a Beatle. Well, maybe we can talk about it that way now that we've gotten used to it as a band name, but that's still not the way we usually use it. We usually just as a name to pick out the band. Okay. We also have definite descriptions. These are expressions starting with the that pick out objects or individuals, usually by describing them uniquely. So the expression, the tallest man in Paris, that picks out somebody, just like Shinzo Abe picks out somebody. But in this case, it picks them out by describing them. You want to know who it names, who it denotes, who it refers to. You find the person who satisfies this property. They are tallest among the men who are in Paris, right? Then we have one-place predicates. These are expressions that describe objects. Blue, describing things that are blue. Sleep, describing things that sleep. Building, describing things that are buildings. There are different categories. Blue is an adjective, sleep is a verb, building is a noun, but they all at least share this property, that they all seem to be true of individual objects. They are one-place predicates. And we have sentences, expressions that in some sense describe situations. When you say Shinzo Abe is sleeping, it's describing situations in which Shinzo Abe is sleeping. Okay, very hard to give a sense beyond that that's any better than that, but if you understand the language, you know what I'm telling you. The sentence Tokyo is in Russia describes situations. It happens to describe only situations that aren't real. Tokyo isn't actually in Russia, but the sentence is a perfectly fine sentence, and it does describe situations, just not real situations. So now let's turn to denotations. I said that denotations are going to be very useful for our semantics. In particular, they're going to be very useful for explaining what it means for two expressions to compose. We're not going to spell that out in detail today, but we will give the basis that we need to be able to do that later. So what are the denotations? Well, the denotation of a name or of a definite description is the object or individual picked out by the name. The denotation of a one-set predicate is a set of objects described by the predicate. And the denotation of a sentence is a truth value. We've already seen those, okay? Can meaning be given entirely in terms of denotations? Or do we also need senses? Well, if we look only at the denotations in the actual world, it's clear that a denotation can't be a meaning. We can see that immediately with sentences. So two sentences that are true have the same denotation, namely true. Maybe Abe is sleeping and the Eiffel Tower is in Paris. These are two sentences that are perhaps both true. They clearly do not have the same meaning. Maybe we got our understanding of denotation wrong for sentences, though. That's such a weird thing to say anyway. Maybe this is just showing that we have a problem. But if we look at other expressions as well, we still have a problem. Consider the two phrases, animal with a heart and animal with a kidney. Now, I don't know if it's true or not, but just suppose, for the sake of argument, that the only animals that have a heart are animals with a kidney, and the only animals with a kidney are animals that have a heart. Okay? If that's true, then these two expressions have the same denotation in the actual world. They pick out the exact same thing. The exact same set of things are animals with a heart and animals with a kidney. Intuitively, however, they don't have the same meaning. So we don't want to say meaning is denotation. Not if we limit ourselves to the actual denotation. But another answer can be given if we go beyond the actual world and look at other ways things could be, what we'll call other possible worlds. Then denotations might be enough. Okay. So let me first explain what a possible world is. A possible world can be thought of as a rearrangement of things in the actual world. A rearrangement where you can just move things around, or maybe add things, maybe take things away. In one possible world, I am sitting in front of my computer recording a class, but I am 10 centimeters further away from the camera than in the actual world. And everything else in that world is the same, as much as possible. In another possible world, I'm not giving a class at all. I'm still a teacher. I still teach at the same university, but classes got canceled because of a coronavirus, for example. In yet another possible world, there was no coronavirus. There was instead a war, and the war caused all sorts of things like a movement of classes online, so that I am now, once again, sitting in front of my computer recording exactly this class. Okay? And then there are worlds that are completely different from anything even close to what we have. There are worlds that contain nothing more than 2 grains of dust. No people, planets, stars, nothing. Uh, okay. So how can we make use of this notion of possible worlds to help with our semantics, to help make use of denotations in particular to distinguish between expressions? We have animal with a heart and animal with a kidney, and we decided that we'll accept that they have the same denotation in the actual world. That doesn't mean they're going to have the same denotation at other worlds. We can easily imagine a world in which some animal, maybe a camel or maybe a unicorn, something that doesn't exist in the actual world, has a heart but no kidney. And there's no reason why animals have to have kidneys after all. In the real world, it certainly helps them survive, but maybe the kidney function is taken over by the brain. In that world, the denotation of animal with a heart would include camels or unicorns, or whichever it is that we have, but it would not include, but that animal would not be included in the denotation of animal with a kidney. Okay, so if we collect together all of these worlds and what they pick out in those worlds, we could come up with something that makes it possible for us to differentiate animal with a heart and animal with a kidney just by looking at what those expressions pick out. Okay, we don't need, in short, we don't need the sense in order to make the distinction. We can look at just denotations, but denotations not only at the actual world, but at all possible worlds. Okay, now I'm going to use the letter W to refer to individual possible worlds. I'll use E, a capital E for an expression, and a small e for what that expression denotes, what its denotation is. Okay. Then we can say the following, that the meaning of an expression, capital E, is a set of pairs, W small e, such that the small e is the denotation of capital E at world W. Okay. Animal with a heart, that's our capital E. It picks out a set of animals. In this world, that's going to include pandas, it's going to include people, it's going to include rats, okay? In some other world, it's going to include those as well as unicorns, which aren't in the actual world, okay? So we collect these WE pairs, the actual world paired with the rats and the pandas and the people, and some other world, W1, that contains those animals and unicorns that also have a heart, okay? We're going to give these, we're going to use some technical terms to describe these two different things. One is the denotation at a particular world. We're going to add another word that means almost the exact same thing as denotation. It's the word extension, okay? The difference is extension is committed to a particular analysis of denotation. But other than that, it's essentially the same idea. So the extension of an expression is its denotation, usually at the actual world, but we're also going to talk about extensions at different worlds, okay? Then we have the collections of all these different extensions. That's what we're going to call an intension. It's a collection of pairs that pair a world with an extension, where the world is a possible world and the extension is the extension of our expression, capital E, at that world. Okay. Throughout this book, we'll make the following assumption. We'll use that @ sign to mark the actual world. It's got a special status. It's unique. It's the one we actually are in, the way things actually are. And we use W1, W2, and as many numbers as we need to describe possible worlds. Maybe one of them will be the actual world in certain cases. We usually use them to pick out the non-actual worlds in order to contrast them with the actual world. But the numbers themselves don't specifically tell you that it's not the actual world. Okay, now let's look at examples. Our first example is an example of a name. We said that the denotation of a name is an individual. Well, what about its intention? Who does it pick out? In the actual world, the name Donald Trump names Donald Trump. It names the person. He's the current United States president, or let's say United States president in the year 2020. So I can keep on using this video in the future. Consider the following possible world. We'll call it W1. There, that same individual, the guy himself, has a different name. And let's say that somebody else in that other world was named Donald Trump. Okay. We're trying to figure out the meaning of the word Donald Trump, and we want to collect together denotations from different worlds. Which person do we get from world W1? Do we take the real world, actual Donald Trump, who has some completely different name in that world? Or do we take the person who has the name Donald Trump, who is a completely different individual? Well, the answer, as you can see on the screen, is that we take the real world Donald Trump. And the reason for that is as follows. We're trying to figure out the way we use language. We're looking at our language, English, as we use it in the actual world. And the way a name works is to pick out a particular individual. The connection between the name and the individual, we said, was direct in a sense. You don't look to see who satisfies some property. The name just picks out the individual. Now, in world W2, that same name picks out a different individual, and that makes the language a different language. I said W2, I meant W1. So in W1, the name Donald Trump is associated with a different individual, different language, and we're not really interested in figuring out what other language we could be speaking. We're trying to figure out how does the language we're actually speaking work. And in that language, the name picks out the individual Donald Trump, always. So we keep that connection, if you will, whenever we're trying to look at the expression of a name. I say we figure out the denotation of the name at a world, because it's the name as we use it in the actual world, and we want to know what that is going to pick out at some other place. Okay. So the intention of a name is going to pair any world at all with Donald Trump, the actual real world Donald Trump, assuming that Donald Trump exists in that world. Okay. Well, okay, second example. The second example is the expression, the US president. And let's make it the US president in 2020, just to be able to continue using this video. The actual US president in 2020 is Donald Trump, okay? But we can imagine other possible worlds, such as world W1, in which the president in 2020 is Barack Obama, or W2, in which the president in 2020 is Hillary Clinton. okay? Now, in this case, we have different people acting as US president in different worlds, but we're still understanding the expression, the US president in 2020, the same way we do that we actually do. We're looking at the way we understand that expression in English, and it's not changing. So the extension of the expression, the US president in 2020, is Donald Trump. And the intention pairs worlds with whoever happens to be the US president in 2020 in that world. W at, in the actual world, it's Donald Trump. It pairs W1 with Barack Obama. It pairs W2 with Hillary Clinton, and so on and so on and so on. For our third example, I see I haven't updated my slide. We're going to imagine that there are only three individuals. Alice, Betty, and Charles. I wanted to say Donald Trump, Barack Obama, and Hillary Clinton. Okay. In the actual world, Alice and Betty are happy, but Charles is not. In world W1, all three are happy, and in world W2, nobody is happy. Okay. Now, the extension of a word like happy is a set of individuals that that word describes. In the actual world, that's Alice and Betty. So the actual world extension of the word happy is the set containing Alice and Betty. The intention pairs worlds with extensions. So we've already looked at the actual world. In the intention, we get a pairing of the actual world with the extension at the actual world, the set containing Alice and Betty. We also pair other worlds with extensions at those worlds. In W1, everybody is happy. So it pairs W1 with the set containing Alice, Betty, and Charles. In W2, nobody is happy. It pairs the world W2 with a set containing no individuals, what we call the empty set. Okay. Example 4, we're going to look at the sentence, the US president is happy. Okay. So we're going to consider three different situations. In the actual world, Donald Trump is a US president, and Donald Trump is happy. In world W1, Barack Obama is a US president, but Barack Obama is not happy. And in world W2, Hillary Clinton is the US president, and Hillary Clinton is happy. Okay. Well, before turning to the next screen, you should try to figure out what the extensions and intentions of these three sentences are. Remember, an extension is a denotation. The denotation for a sentence is either the value true or the value false. So here's what we get. The sentence, the US president is happy, is true in the actual world because Donald Trump is the US president in the actual world, and Donald Trump, in our example, is happy. The intention pairs worlds now with truth values. In the actual world, we get something true. In world 1, we get something that's false. The US president in world 1 is Barack Obama, and he was not happy in world 1, and therefore false. In world 2, that was Hillary Clinton, president. Hillary Clinton happy, therefore, in world, right, pairs world 2 with a value true. So you can see now how we might be able to make a difference between different sentences that have different meanings using only denotations at different worlds. Because if we change the sentence just a little bit, we're going to end up with a different pattern of truth and falsity at different worlds. And so we can tell different sentences apart using intentions. Okay. So we look at truth. A sentence is either true or false in the actual world. And since many sentences are true and many sentences are false, its truth or falsity, or that is to say, its truth value doesn't give us the meaning. That's kind of saying the same thing that saying that the denotation or the extension doesn't give us the sense or intention. But truth conditions are a better candidate for meaning. If you know under what conditions a sentence is true, under what conditions it is false, its truth conditions, then you essentially know the meaning of the sentence. The truth conditions determine whether the sentence is true or false at every possible world. So if we think of truth conditions as giving us the sense, we can also say that the truth conditions or the sense determine the intention. Okay, we're going to stop there for today. The main points that I want you to take home with you from today's lecture. First, that there are two different ways of looking at meaning that are focusing on meaning in language, what sentences and expressions and things people say mean. One of them is semantics, where we're looking at the literal meaning of the sentences. The other, pragmatics, where we're looking at the message that those sentences are used to convey. Okay. When we look at semantics in particular, we start to ask questions of how we get meanings put together. We get those meanings by connecting expressions with two things, senses and denotations. We have a very hard time specifying exactly what we mean by a sense, though we can kind of describe senses. But denotations are easier. We can actually pick out specific things and say those are in the denotation. We can't pick out the denotation itself, but we can agree, all of us, on whether something belongs in a denotation or not. It's very hard to agree on senses at times. Okay. We've seen that the meanings have to be assigned to individual words. We have to somehow connect our meaning of cat with the word cat. And we might do that by looking at cats, trying to figure out what they have in common, and decide that that thing they have in common gives us the sense for the cat, for the word cat. And the things that are picked out by that sense gives us the denotation of the word cat. We saw that we can take these denotations, these senses, these words with their meanings and put them together into more complex meanings, and that can be done without any upper bound. We can keep on doing it over and over and over for if we have the right structures to play with. And then we saw that we can make distinctions between different expressions using something only like denotations, right? Denotations were the things that don't feel very meaning-like, but we get closer and closer to meanings with them if we look not only at the actual denotation of an expression, but its denotation at all different possible worlds. That makes it possible to make a difference between different sentences, between animal with a kidney, animal with a heart. Okay, and at least that's one of the things that we want our language to be able to do, to tell us when things do and do not have different, the same meaning. Okay, so we'll stop there and continue again next week.